Hello, this is your instructor, Melissa Stockham, and this is the Week 1 lecture supplement for General Psychology. First of all, I want to apologize that you're looking at a bouquet of roses instead of myself. There's a reason for that. I am sick. I look absolutely terrible right now. Yesterday I had to fly from Denver to Orlando for 5 hours, probably the most miserable flight I've ever had in my life, and that's saying something. And I'm not feeling well, so it'd be completely unprofessional for me to put myself on the camera right now. So you're looking at a bouquet of pretty flowers from here inside my art room in my home instead of me. If I feel better next week, will put myself on camera, so have no fear. So, when we talk about psychology, we ask ourselves, what is psychology? Psychology is the scientific study of human thought, emotion, and behavior. Now, what does all that mean? When I say it is scientific, I mean that it is based upon science. There is, I believe, a common preconception that psychology is just the reiteration of folk wisdom, or what we used to call old wives' tales. Ideas like birds of a feather flock together versus opposites attract. These are ideas that we can test. I mean, those two old wives' sayings, birds of a feather flock together and opposites attract, are pretty much opposite ideas, but we can determine which of them is correct by using science. And what we find is people who have common interests tend to flock together. Facebook knows this. Facebook has something, I'm sure if you've been on Facebook, you've seen called People You May Know. All social media does this at some point, where in addition to going into your contacts and determining who they are and people you may know, how many of us have seen somebody at work we absolutely don't like on our People You May Know? But like, for example, the idea that mutual friends oftentimes are friends themselves or can become friends. That's an idea that Facebook has capitalized on over the years. But we base it upon science, research. A big part of it is research. We often, I think, believe that psychology is somebody lying on a couch and somebody standing over them with a pad and pen, asking them to look at ink blots and tell them what those ink blots mean to them. That is part of psychology, but it is not the whole picture of psychology. This is a 4-week course. To tell you the truth, you could study psychology for 5 years and get a PhD and still not have a complete knowledge of everything there is to know in psychology. But hopefully I'm whetting your appetite enough in this class that you'll want to learn more eventually. We talk about human thought, emotion, and behavior. That's not denying that animals do not have thoughts, emotions, and behavior, but we only look here at humans. Animal psychology is a whole nother topic for a completely different course. We look at thoughts, what people think, to the degree that we can measure those things, either by self-report or behavior or whatever. Emotions, to the degree we can measure emotions, and behavior. There is actually an entire school of thought called behaviorism, and there is actually a strain of that school called radical behaviorism. Radical behaviorists believe that there is no such thing as thoughts or emotions. It's all behavior. So I'll leave that as an idea. Is that true or not? Just something to consider. Why is the study of psychology important? Because if we have an understanding of why people think, feel, and do the things they do, we can use it to help those people. If you have somebody coming in, if you're a doctor and somebody comes in and they're pretty much a candidate for a heart attack, and you can tell that from their biological workups, then you can maybe look at psychologically, is this person a very hard-driven person? Does this person live and die by deadlines and goals? Is this person what we call now in psychology a type A personality? A concept that, by that way, was created by a cardiologist who was tired of replacing the credenzas in his waiting room because everybody in the waiting room, again, people who are candidates for a heart attack, were all on the edge of the seat, so the front cushions of the seats were all getting destroyed. So we can use it to help people. We can use it to help the people in their lives. And we can also use psychology to make this world a better place. If we know what motivates people, and we understand that people have a huge impact on our world, then we can use that information to create either incentives or other motivations for them to make the world better. So let's dive into the first major topic, the biological underpinnings of psychology. I must point out this is a very new concept in psychology. When I took psychology later in my collegiate career, I started my career in political science, determined I was going to be a lawyer no matter what. Then the LSAT gave me, handed me idea you might want to consider something else. I took my first psychology course, and back then the idea that psychology had biological underpinnings was a very new concept. We all know that the human brain, which is part of the central nervous system and a physical organ that you can measure, was a huge part of psychology, but we did not understand the full mechanisms of that as of that point. And that raises the first question I think we need to ask as far as biological psychology is concerned. What actually is a mind? We've all heard the term mind. Someone has a very strong mind, someone has a brilliant mind, someone has a not so brilliant mind since the time we were young. So we've become conditioned to the idea that the mind is something. But what is it? Is it the brain? The brain is basically a big pile of neural spaghetti that's contained in our skulls that is the chief organ of the central nervous system. Is that the mind? Or is it what I think is probably a more sensible definition of the mind, a compilation of experiences of oneself and from learning from others, things learned, thoughts, motivations, desires, and instincts? What is it? And how do we measure that? So that is a large part of it. Now, also, when I first got into psychology in 1992, the idea of psychological medications as a treatment for chronic problems was a very, very new concept. Now today, of course, turn on the 6 o'clock news and every other commercial is about, have you been feeling a little withdrawn from society? Have you felt that a little depressed? Do you ever feel you experience highs and lows? I'm using those as three different examples of things that people now. Back in the day, we told that person, well, you might want to change your environment, you might want to go to therapy, you might want to do that. Now we just say, here, take this, and call me back in a month so we can do your blood work. Is that a good thing? I always say you watch the 6 o'clock news and you'll see 1,000 different, not being sarcastic, but many different psychological medications for psychological disorders. And then fast forward 3 years later and you're watching late night television and you see lawyers on television asking if you took this, that, and the other drug and saying you might be entitled to a part of a class action settlement. So I think you have to look at it several different ways, that can help people. Now, and I myself am an attorney, so I'm not faulting those attorneys for doing that kind of work. But, okay, great, that person can now collect money, but does that trade off for the problems they might experience because of those drugs? Might those individuals have been better served by changing their environment? If someone is depressed because they have a toxic parent or a toxic spouse, or because their work situation is toxic, getting out of that situation, it's I think there's no easy answer, but I think you have to look at it from different angles. That said, if any of you happen to be taking a psychological medication for, say, depression, anxiety, or whatever, I am not telling you to go off of them. I am not a psychologist or a medical doctor. That is a question for a doctor only. But I'm just saying, I'm just talking about societal norms and phenomenon. The first thing we look at when we talk about the biological underpinnings of psychology is memory, how we store information. When I took psychology for the first time in 1992, by a crazy random happenstance, I also was taking a computer class. Nicely, believe it or not, those two courses dovetailed each other because both discussed memory, how we input memory, how memory will come out as a result of how it's inputted, about possible problems with memory, and so forth. In a computer, if you're talking about a computer, if I've got a computer in this room here, if I take it and drop it in a in a swimming pool and then try to use it, I might find that the memory is somehow messed up in one way or another. How many of us have stored something on an external drive only for that external drive to accidentally get submerged in water and then found the problem with it? How many of us know somebody who, after a heavy night of drinking or whatever, has found that their memory has been in some way or another negatively impacted? So the idea of the mind like a computer. I can tell you that during the time of the computer revolution of the early 90s, a lot of psychologists were being recruited to determine how to help to make memory work faster and more efficiently. Bear in mind, back then, a computer like the computer that your bank would use to store your bank information was probably the size of the room I am in right now. And today, the phone I am recording this video on has much more capabilities and probably store more memory than that gigantic room in a computer in a room somewhere. So the idea is that memory is comparable to computers. Are we like computers? Well, it depends. If you talk to some of the big purveyors of artificial intelligence, yes, our minds are like computers, and computers can be, in certain ways, taught to respond to certain things like a person would. That is, again, very controversial. There is, I believe, a growing concern that computers will eventually take over. Every so often you read an article about artificial intelligence saying it's going to take over the world and everything. I think you have to look at those things with a certain amount of askance. Computers will always be controlled by individuals. We just have to watch the values of those individuals who are controlling them. I think that there is a lot of opportunities in artificial intelligence. We hear a lot about possible jobs that will go unfilled in the future. Computers can take up that slack. Computers can be sent to dangerous conditions. I mean, drones. Can be used to be sent to circumstances where we can't ethically probably send a human being because we believe a human being has is, for whatever reason, ethically believe a human being has a soul, or we just think it's the right thing to do, or whatever, so that might mean we can't send a human being to Mars for research because obviously that person would have to stay on Mars until they die, which probably would not be very long after that, but we can send robots. So I just think it's something to ponder. And then we talk about language. Language is the study of how we communicate, how we pick up our own languages, and the differences in our languages. Most of us watching this video are probably from the United States or Canada. Canadian and American English are very similar. Really it's sometimes the changing of a certain word or a certain syllable, maybe the adding of a letter U to certain words that we don't hear down here in the States. But you go to Scotland or you go to Wales and you try to communicate with somebody there with an American form of English, you won't be able to do so. You'll have some luck in England, but in Scotland, forget about it. So, how do different languages pick up? How do language barriers develop? I think one of the reasons why Canadian English and American English are very similar is because we have such geographic proximity to one another. That's not the case in Scotland. It is a little more so in England because I guess I'm not sure, but there is something. How can we improve language to improve communication? That's why we want to improve language, so that we can improve communication. And then we talk about intelligence. There's probably no more controversial concept in psychology than intelligence. Why? Because intelligence is something that can be used to determine one's future. I know somebody who could talk before they were 1 year old, picked up on their ABCs by the time they were 18 months, thanks to the educational programming of the time, was certified, was considered such an advanced student, they skipped the first grade, was deemed certified gifted, which is considered a high form of intelligence, by fourth grade, and that had implications for the schools they were eligible to enroll in later on, the colleges that would take them. They were branded as smart. And in our educational system, the idea that you have a high intelligence can have ramifications for you well past graduation. So, what is intelligence? Some would argue that intelligence is goal-directed behavior. And how do we measure intelligence? Well, there used to be a form of intelligence testing. We still use intelligence testing to this day, but it's very controversial, in large part because it is standardized testing. Back in the old days, there was actually a scale of things, again, justified by science, that came up to what we called the mental age. And then we divided that by your chronological age. So you had your mental age divided by your chronological age, and that came up with your intelligence quotient. Again, when you divide two numbers, the outcome is a quotient. If you were 35 years old and your mental age was 35, the quotient was going to be 1. So you had an IQ of 100, which was considered average. Now we have a standardized test in which the mean and median are 100, and then there's a standard deviation of 15 each way. So if you have an IQ of 85, you are considered to have to be challenged. If you have an IQ of 115, you're considered to be gifted. If you have an IQ of 130, you're considered to be a genius. Where does intelligence come from? Is it the product of genetics, or is it the product of environment? If it is the product of environment, we can modify someone's environment to enhance their intelligence. If it's the product of genetics, what does that tell us about the world? And can we truly tell if it is genetics? Identical twins are much more likely to have similar IQs than non-identical twins. However, most identical twins are raised in a somewhat identical environment. How many of us know identical twins who have names like Benny and Lenny, to where they have similar names, they are dressed similar in part to save the parents money, and they were raised in similar environments? Could that be the the explanation for the genetic link that some people argue is in intelligence? Why is this important? Again, because if you are branded as having a high intelligence, that can have ramifications for you for the rest of your life. If you are branded as having low intelligence, that can have ramifications for you for the rest of your life. So we better be getting that right, however we do it. And with that, I will end this lecture supplement. Thank you for indulging the fact that the flowers here are here instead of me, and I'll look forward to talking to you in the chat room. Take care. Bye-bye.